Welcome back to part 2 of our Black Horse in Pastel. We're going to work on the mane today. So I've got my black 229 NuPastel, and I'm going to start defining the shapes in the mane. This will take quite a bit of time. I want to carefully put these dark areas in because this is going to make a big difference in the final effect for what we're looking to achieve. So I'm putting in the shadows with my black NuPastel. Now, when we initially drew the painting, we on the paper, remember we used our pencil to add some of these areas. You can still see my pencil marks, and that serves as a guideline to where I want to add the black pastel. But now I want to add more of that. Now I've switched to my Prussian blue 508.5 to add more blue to the main area as my base coat. So I'm applying that before I add the black, continue to add black shadows to the mane. So I encourage you to take your time and we're going to build up this area just like we did the face. Now I'm going to add my dark gray, 707.3 dark gray over the mane in the front area here around the ears. And over the ears. I'm using the end so I can be a little more precise where I place it. I'm using light pressure. Slowly build up the layers of pastel. And now I'm going over that again with the blue, kind of pushing it into the paper there for a minute. Back to my 229 NuPastel. Now this is the Rembrandt 700.5 black, the rich black. I'm putting over the same area of the mane. Using it on its end and just adding a light layer, cross hatching back and forth. So we're building up that black color. So now I'm going back in and putting more darks in with my NuPastel. And you can see down in the right hand corner I have my glassine paper to rest my hand on. Keeps my hand out of my painting. I used to use black paper, and black paper is good because it cuts reflection, but the glassine works better because it doesn't stick to pastel. So be sure and use that if you have it. I pay careful attention to where I'm going to add this, just carving out these dark areas in the mane. Taking my time. Oh, now this is our purple, the 536.3 Violet Rembrandt. I'm adding some purple to that area, taking opportunity to use color. And this is the 538.5 Mars Violet, which is a purpley brown. So I'm adding just a bit in this area before going back to using my 229 NuPastel. So again, we add the darks before we add the lights. I speeded this up a little bit to show you how I proceed with adding the darks. I don't actually color quite this fast. Now I'm going to, you can't see exactly, I've got the blue in my hand, it's become very small. So I added a little more blue, dark blue Rembrandt pastel, and then I added some black, really darkening it in this area. And now I've sharpened my 229 black pastel, and I'm back to adding more pastel. I've also moved my glassine paper to cover the horse's face, so I make sure I don't get my hand in that. I'm using my 259 dark gray to add a lighter edge to that back ear. I'm going to speed this up just a little bit for you while I continue just to add 229 black to the horse's mane. Now I'm working on this ear that's turned outward towards us a little bit. I'm using the white charcoal pencil to put a little highlight line on the back, and I'm using the 229 black pastel, NuPastel, to color the inside of the ear and to stroke out a few of the hairs. Now you can see the white charcoal pencil line that we put there when we did our initial drawing that shows the hairs and the inside edge of the ear. So I'm going to put in these dark areas next to the ear. before I finish the ear. I want to add my darks first before I put in the hairs in the ear so that you can see them more easily. And you can see very faintly my white lines that I drew in initially with my white charcoal pencil. So all these things are serving as a guide to help me with my painting. This horse has a glorious mane, so we want to take our time putting in all the details. I'm using my 6B charcoal pencil to add in a few hairs in the mane. Kind of define where the back edges are. This will show us where the outer edge is that we're going to color to that outer edge. And you can see I haven't added any color back there yet, so I'm going to need to do that. At 538.5, I'm adding a little bit of that before I go back to using my NuPastel to add the dark shadows to the mane. More black. I have 2 or 3 black pastels. Some have labels on them and some do not. Previously you saw one that did not have a label on it. Now I'm going to use the 700.5 black Rembrandt to add a light layer of black over the mane. Just like we did on the previous part of the mane as we started to build it up. We used the same colors to add layers. So I added those layers, and now I can go back to my NuPastel to add more darks and then adjust things as I decide, make decisions based on my reference. I'm adding some more brown. If I add these colors first, then add the NuPastel, because the NuPastel is probably the darkest thing we're going to add. That's our shadows. So I add the lighter layers of color, the brown, the purple, and the blue, before I add this black. Still using NuPastel 229 black. I've speeded things up a little bit again, so I'm just going to let you watch as I add these dark areas. I do want to mention that I am using I would say a moderate pressure to do this. NuPastels are fairly hard, and so I can use a harder pressure than I would if I was using a softer pastel, because they don't deposit as much color. So I'm putting that gorgeous dark color in. Now we're back in real time. I'm working now on the hairs that are coming down across the back of the horse. So I'm putting in this dark area, kind of carving out those darks. I'm not going to be able to fully define this area until we put in the back of the horse, but that will be in a later segment of our video workshop. I hope you're enjoying these workshops as much as I'm enjoying making them for you. I'm drawing in some hairs there. Now we're going to start adding some lights. This is $2.99 NuPastel, and I'm using one of the 4 sharp edges to draw in the light hairs on the mane, pulling them across the forehead. I've switched to the 211 white to make brighter lines. I'm going to draw them across the forehead. The 299 wasn't bright enough, so now I'm using 211 white, sharp edge. And now I'll show you a little tip. I'm going to use the 9B graphite pencil to draw a shadow underneath those hairs so they show up a little better. So now I'm going to go back and forth between the 299. This is the 299. I'm putting a highlight on the front of the ear and a little reflected light on the back. And I'm going to continue to draw the brighter hairs in the mane. And this mane has got the hairs kind of twist and turn, so I can twist and turn my stick at the same time to get those hairs. And when my pastel gets dull, I go back and sharpen it. So I'm switching between, this is the 211, and putting in those hairs, and switching back to the 299 to put in a little less bright hair. And as you see, when the edge gets dull, I rotate it in my hand and draw out those little wavy hairs. I'm continuing to add the hairs one at a time. It's important to remember that I'm able to add these hairs because my pastel layers are relatively thin. If I'd put a lot of heavy pastel on for the underlayers of this horse, I would not be able to get these fine hairs. So be sure and go lightly with your layers, your underpainting, so that you can put your highlights on. You can always add more pastel if you need to, but you can't take off what's there very easily. I'm going to let you continue to watch me do this. I'm not going to speed it up. I want you to see it in real time. I go very slowly to add these hairs. This is really the most important part. This glorious mane is one of the focal points of our picture. So we want to take our time and add the colors. I'm using, right there I was using the point of the pastel. I'm using the point there, the corner, to draw those hairs. I'm sorry, it's not the point, the corner. And it makes for very nice hairs. Now I'm using my white charcoal pencil to add a little wispy hair there. We're going to add more of those later. So I'm just going to let you guys watch. So I drew out the light hairs in the ear with the 299, and now I'm using the sharp edge of a 229 black to add dark hair in between the white ones, because I got a little too many white hairs, so I wanted to add some shadow area with the black. So you can go back and forth adding lights. I'm going to add a few more lights. And a few darks with that 229, excuse me. I'm just continuing to draw in the hairs one at a time using 211 white. And now I've switched back to the 299. I decided 211 was too bright. Actually, this is the 299 was also too bright. This is the 289. I'm going over that area with the black. So I want some of these hairs to look like they're in the shadows of where the mane falls. And I think that was very effective. So here's some more 299. So we don't want everything to look the same. You remember this is the same color that we used on the horse's face to start with. Still using the 289. Now I'm going to switch to my white charcoal pencil and pull out some of these hairs to a finer line. You can see I can add some nice thin wavy hairs. Makes a lovely accent to our mane. You don't want to add too many. Now this is the 538.5. I was going to use the black, but decided it needed a little brown first. And then I'll go over that with the 700.5 black in the shadow. So I added some grays earlier and some brown, and now I'm darkening down that shadow area so the hairs disappear into the shadows. Again, the 289 gray, a medium gray. You can see I use both ends of my pastel. And then I'm going back in with the 229, adding some shadows. And here I'm just adding another little hair in there, coming out of the shadow. I'm drawing very lightly with the 289 to get that shadow in. Add some 538.5 Mars Violet before I add some more hair with the 289. So you can see I'm constantly adjusting the values and the shades. And you may wonder, I always look at the end of my pastel before I use it because I have gotten, it only happens once, ended up picking up a speck of red pastel on the end of a stick and applied it to my painting and had red pastel all over it that it couldn't get off very easily. So I always check the bottoms, the edges of my pastel to make sure they don't have an unwanted color on them. Now I've switched back to my 211 white, and you can see in that little area I'm pushing harder and adding a bright white area. Just a little bit to focus our attention. You don't want to add too much. It loses its effect when you add too much. So I'm rubbing it in, going back and forth to get that bright white. Thank you for joining me for part 2 of the Black Horse. Join me for part 3 where we add some background.